when we talk about collective responsibility, I'd like to share a story of a student who came here in second grade this year. He came here as a special ed student, and he was 2 grade levels behind. He had been to 2 different schools, and he was a struggling student. He didn't have a lot of confidence. There were some behavior issues. And when we looked at why he couldn't read, it wasn't because he was special ed or English language learner. It was because nobody had ever taught him how to read. They had never taught him how to read. He had been to these different schools, and his parents told us they thought he was a problem child. And the problem was these schools weren't working as professional learning communities. They were working, all the staff were working in isolation. So if I'm a teacher and I have all these students at different levels, and I'm working in isolation, and I can't meet the needs of all these students, what is my first recourse? I'm going to refer them to special ed. And this is what happened to this student. And this is what happens around this country, unfortunately. We have so many kids, minorities, English language learners, and they get farmed out to special ed because we are putting people in isolation, and it's a shame. It really is a moral shame that we're doing this. So our moral imperative is, it is hard work. This is extremely hard work for us to work in a culture of collaboration where we're asking people to be transparent. We're asking teachers to say to themselves, these are, I do this well, but I don't do this well. And then we're asking teachers to say to their teammates, I don't do this well, help me. And it's hard, but it's also liberating, because for too long we've allowed teachers, or we've forced teachers to be the experts at everything, and it really has put a lot of pressure on them, and they don't feel like they can do everything, and that's where we get burnout. But if we work in this way, where we are sharing practices and being transparent and being honest with each other and really saying, okay, the team, the collective wisdom of this team is going to ensure that this child who's somebody else's child, but this child who we own as our child, and our children, they're going to have the life of endless possibilities that we want for our own children. Then the moral imperative is not so hard. It becomes a mission. And it's not, it sounds pie in the sky, but whose child are you going to tell that's going to be in jail in 10 years, or who's going to be dead in 10 years? Nobody. So if we're going to say that that's going to happen, then we have to work in such a way that we ensure that doesn't happen. And we can't do that in isolation. So when we tell people you're going to come in and work here, or when we hire them and they come here and they see in the way that we work, it's actually liberating, because they don't have to know everything, and they can rely on their teammates to make sure that we get this child the best opportunity that they deserve.
So it happened with this little boy that came to us in second grade. In having that culture here of collaboration, when he walked through the door, or when any student walks through the door, but when this little second grader walked through the door, his team circled him. So the special education team, the second grade team, the reading specialists, the mathematics specialists, the ESOL teachers, the counselors, we all put our arms around him and looked at the data that we had. We gave him some assessments. We looked at his plan that came with him, and poured our work around the needs that he had. And it was very intensive support. He was a second grader, and he was not reading even close to grade level. He was still at the beginning of a first grade reading level, and had a lot of deficits in mathematics as well. So we designed a plan for this student that was very specific to the strengths of his team. And if you want to think about a medical team surrounding a child, it's all of those specialists putting their expertise and their hands on the child. And where he is now, he is no longer in special education. He is reading at grade level. He is being successful in the classroom. And those labels that are often attached to kids that they carry through their life impacts their future. But this little boy, he is not going to be going to middle school as a special ed student or an English learner or anyone with that label that could potentially impact the choices that he has in terms of classwork, coursework, and what he wants to become as an adult. So when we think about that collaboration, it's about circling every single child with the entire team and all of the expertise that they bring to the team and working through it. Sometimes we try things that don't work and we come back to the table and say, well, that wasn't a very effective strategy. What are we going to do now? And you don't give up.
So in one semester, this child is out of special education. Now think about that. Think about if he had stayed in those other schools where he was in isolation. It should not be dependent on the school you go to, which directs the trajectory of your life. That's not fair. And if that student had stayed in those other schools, that student would still be in special education, that student would be labeled, and that student's trajectory would be jail or death. And that's why we say it's a moral imperative, and that's why we don't play. So often, English language learners and students who are minority are put in special ed because they are in, unfortunately, inferior schools or in situations where teachers are working in isolation and they don't know what to do, so they refer them thinking that they're getting them help, but in reality, they're giving them a life sentence to something that's probably not what they want.